spot with this? All right. Hello, women on the stage. Hello, I see you. In a good and bad way. I come from my mom's Korean, and in Korean culture, it's not about you play games, but it's not about who wins. It's about punishing a loser. It's like culturally, it's like different value system, and so American culture is very like everyone plays soccer and everyone gets a prize, and Korean culture is like shame somebody publicly. So I feel great. Like if someone falls asleep, I have zero problems with like mid-back, you're asleep. So it's been a pleasure to be with you. I mean, you should really give a hand to your committee that's been planning this day because they've worked so hard. They've been fantastic and really hospitable to me. And I want to jump in. How many of you were able to join us in chapel this morning? Fantastic. So just to lay the foundation, I talked a little bit about Luke 1 and how we get a snapshot. Luke is anchored in this motif of two people in the same situation responding differently. And so Zechariah and Mary both get visited by an angel, find out about unexpected pregnancies, and respond differently. And what we see is that Zechariah is the person at the center. Zechariah is a religious leader. Zechariah is a man. Zechariah is well-educated. Zechariah is in the temple. You think he's going to be the model of faith. Mary is over here. She's illiterate. She's anonymous. Nobody knows her. She's from a podunk town from the middle of nowhere. But she is brought from the margins to the center. And that is what the kingdom of God is about. And so we're going to continue to dig into this from the margins to the center. And we're also going to take one particular woman's story in Scripture and excavate it for what we can be learning about perseverance, suffering, talking to Jesus about these things. So we're going to be in Luke 8. Luke 8, verse 21. When Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered around him, and he was by the sea. I think, again, there's this image of Jesus, right? There's always kind of like hippie Jesus, I like to call him. He's like white guy Jesus with like long brown hair, and he's just like staring into space in profile. And this light is actually working for me on this point, because he's like kind of like side lit. It's either that, or there's like Jesus, who's also still hippie Jesus, who like has a little sheep. And what that doesn't convey is kind of the rock star energy that was surrounding Jesus all the time. Every place he went, there was a crowd. Every place he went, people. So it's more like how we see, when paparazzi and crowds like find famous people and they're like shy. I used to live in LA, and in LA, like you see famous people pretty often, and you'll see like crowds that start to like gather outside of like places where they are, and they're like super famous. And that's the kind of energy that followed Jesus. So Jesus gets off the boat, and there's this crowd like bustling around with him. And in the middle of that crowd, I was trying to think, I'm like, who is a popular like famous singer now? And I was like, oh, I'm old, because all I can think of is Justin Bieber. And then all I could think of was this Office reference where Dwight calls him Justice Beaver. And Jim's letting in, and Dwight's like, who's Justice Beaver? And Jim's like a crime-fighting beaver. But there's this crowd that's following him around, and if you picture whoever is young, that the young people like. And one of the leaders of the synagogue named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, fell at his feet and begged him repeatedly, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be made well and live." So this is intensely dramatic, right? Like Jairus is a leader, he is a leader of the synagogue, he's going to be a powerful and respected man in his city. But like any parent, like his daughter is sick. So he's desperate. Probably where I saw this maybe most profoundly was I've been in campus ministry a lot of years, and I was discipling this woman, and her brother who was in high school got cancer, and got a brain tumor, and then this cancer spread all over. And being with her family through that, and watching a parent watch their child have terminal cancer is one of the most desperate and terrible things I've ever seen. And this is what Jairus is going through. And so when he comes, what I like is that you don't even see Jesus respond in any way. It just says, so he went with him. And what I love is that it says, and also the crowd followed and pressed in. So it's not like the crowd's like, oh, that seems personal. I'm going to let you guys go and handle this. The crowd's like, yeah, also go to Jairus' house. Seems terribly interesting. So it's just like, in this crowd, in the margins, right? So hidden inside this crowd is this woman that we're about to meet. So here's what we learn about her. There was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years, and she had endured much under many physicians and had spent all that she had, and she was no better, but rather grew worse. Okay. I'm glad it's a lady conference, because we're going to talk about lady bleeding. So, you know, like whenever dudes preach on this, they're like, she had an issue of blood. Or, you know, whatever. I'm like, this woman has been hemorrhaging blood from her body. Think about how old you were 12 years ago. From then until now. All right? Nobody even wants to just like have their period. This woman has something wrong with her body, right? Where you just feel it, you're in pain. I don't like going to the OBGYN in 2018 in like the United States of America. Do you think that in the Middle East 2,000 years ago, a woman going from doctor to doctor to doctor over this ailment, do you know how humiliating that would be? Think about how personal that is. Think about how embarrassing that conversation is every time. But not only that, she's actually sick, and she's actually in pain. Like, you know how it is, you get a cold and you're congested and you can't breathe out of your nose for like 3 days, and you're like, Jesus, I'll never take my nose for granted again. Do you know what I'm saying? You're like, God, why did I ever take breathing for granted? Like, this woman is hemorrhaging this blood out of her body in a way that is painful. For more than half of many of your lives. So one, she's just in physical discomfort for a long time. Then she goes from doctor to doctor, and they don't help her. But she loses her money, and she gets worse. So about like, I know in 2003, my mom got sick, or she started kind of, feeling like discomfort internally. But my father passed away in 2003, and because of the grief and the process that we were in, she didn't go to the doctor right away. And so by the time she went to the doctor, this kind of minor pain had turned into a pretty significant infection. And she I watched her for years, go from doctor to doctor to try to get this internal infection, which was sort of like spread about in a way that they couldn't resolve. And they could not fix it. And literally for over 7 years, my mom suffered. And she went to one doctor who did like this particular procedure on her, and he was like, oh, it's a new procedure, it's gonna work. And he did it on her 3 or 4 times. And later she went to the next doctor, and he's like, all he did to you was cause scar tissue inside of you. What do you think is happening to this woman emotionally? I want you to turn to your neighbor and list off 3 or 4 words to describe this woman's emotional world. Go, do it. Frustrated, yes. What else? Sorry? Taken advantage of. Agree. What else? Debilitated. True. Discouraged. Undesirable. Mortified? Yes. Annoyed. Hopeless. Pardon? Lonely? Yes. Don't you think she's profoundly depressed at this point? 12 years in, incredibly sick. Now she is broke. When you are bleeding like this, you're ritually or ceremonially unclean, which was not uncommon. A lot of Jewish people were like ritually unclean, but you could go through a ceremony to become clean. But as long as you were that way, you couldn't participate fully in Jewish religious life. So you can't go to the synagogue, you can't go to the temple, you can't participate. So your whole community right, is Jewish, or here at Corban, right, like people are Christian here, but you can't participate, you can never come to chapel, you can never come to a gathering, you can never go to class. How connected do you think you're going to feel to this community? So she's cut off from her community. She may have been married, but I think at some point that situation's going to end. So I think she's emotionally hopeless, depressed, financially she's broke, she's humiliated, she's frustrated. She's spiritually isolated. This is her situation. And it's been going on for years. I just want you to think about, can you remember what was going on in December? Can you take it back to like what was going on with you April 2014? 12 years, this woman. Physically, emotionally, relationally, spiritually, she is broken and desperate. But she'd heard about Jesus. Now the thing is, she's not like Jairus. Jairus is desperate, and when Jairus wants help from Jesus, Jairus comes right up to Jesus and is like, help my daughter. But this woman doesn't do that, because they are located in different places in that society. Even though Jairus is desperate, I'm not minimizing the fact that it's terrible that his daughter's sick. He's still powerful. Do you know what I'm saying? So he feels like he can walk straight up to Jesus. But this woman is not even supposed to be in that crowd. So she's in the crowd, but she knows that she's not supposed to even be touching anyone in that crowd. But what's getting her there is some small desperation and a small amount of hope. Right, so this woman is up in this crowd, in literal margins. And she, you know, like when you're in a crowd, I'm 5'4", so when I'm in a crowd, I feel like about armpit level to everybody. And so she's moving through the crowd, but maybe by where the energy's at, she can tell where Jesus is at. And she's slowly moving herself closer. And then at some point, she can see him. Right, at some point, she can see him through the crowd. And at some point, she's close enough. And because of who she is and where she is in that society, she ain't even going to try to do a face-first verbal ask. But at some point, she gets close enough and she just, right, just reaches and touches. She feels healing. Just wash. She hasn't felt right. Well, years. For the first time, there's no pain. For the first time, there's no pain. Right? And I think she's probably barely able to take this in. Barely able to kind of breathe for a second and realize, like, and then Jesus goes, who touched me? And stops the entire crowd. Now when we get cute and we like try Christian culture things, we turn this into like a precious moment, you know, and Jesus is like, who touched me? And she's like, 'twas I. That's not what's happening here. What just happened is this unclean woman reached through the crowd and grabbed a rabbi without his permission and stole healing. And now he's stopped everything and is asking who did that. She doesn't know, right? Don't make things cute when they're not cute. This is scary. She doesn't know why he's stopping everything. So, and he just stops. And you have to remember, there's urgency here. Jairus' little daughter is dying. Stops, just stands there, who touched me? And the disciples are like, bro, like such a crowd. So many people. Let's get to Jairus' house, bro. This seems weird. And this woman is standing there. She hasn't even had a chance to take in the healing. And she knows it's her. And she knows he is literally calling her out. You know how it is in class, like when you don't want the professor to call on you? This is like that times a billion, right? So she's pondering what she's gonna do. And I think in perhaps one of the most courageous moments we see in Scripture, she comes forward. She comes forward. And it says, immediately her hemorrhage stopped. She felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Immediately, aware that power had gone forth from him, Jesus turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" His disciples said, "You see the crowd." But he looked around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. Think about what that's like as a Jewish woman in a giant crowd telling some religious leader who's like super connected to God. Right? I mean, how much does she know about it? Just like, he's very powerful. He instantly healed her, but now he's stopping everything. She's terrified. Tells him the whole truth. What's her whole truth? "Rabbi, I've been hemorrhaging blood. I'm an unclean woman for 12 years. It was me, I touched you." Can you just even wrap your mind around how mortifying it would be to have to say that in front of a group of people that you don't know? Why is Jesus doing this? And Jesus says to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." I want to just tease this apart. We said that she is physically and emotionally and relationally and spiritually empty. When he starts with daughter, what's he doing? Family. You haven't had any? Jairus is a father to his daughter, and Jairus is advocating for his daughter. So who's the father now, and who's being advocated for? Jesus is saying, "Daughter, I'm the father now, and I'm advocating for you. And you were literally hidden in the margins, and I didn't let you stay there. Because where is she right now? Exactly where Jairus was, right in front of her, telling her whole story, just the way Jairus felt like he could tell his whole story. Daughter, relationally, he's healing her. Your faith has made you well. We said spiritually she's isolated and been cut off. And in that culture, people are going to be like, she probably did something to deserve this. So it's important that she hears it and that the community hears it. Your faith has made you well. You didn't steal a healing, and I'm not punishing you for it. I'm affirming that what you did is faith. I'm affirming in front of all these people that what you did, this scary, terrifying thing, is faith. I'm naming it and I see it. Go in peace. When's the last time you think this woman knew peace? Go in peace. I'm not taking the healing back. And be healed of your disease. She's already been healed, but he's confirming it and affirming it for her sake and for the community's sake. So amazing and transformative. So he heals her physically, emotionally, relationally, spiritually, and restores her into community. Isn't that beautiful? And isn't it just terrible? We want, when we say, "Oh, an encounter with Jesus," oh, Jesus coming into our suffering, we want it to be cute. We want it to be private. We want it to make total sense and to know where he's going with it. We also want him to do it sooner than 12 years. We're talking about perseverance and suffering. And what makes it suffering is that it's something bad plus a long time. Right? If it's just for like 15 minutes, that's just called like a bad thing that happened a few minutes ago. But suffering is the bad thing plus time. Perseverance is engaging in the hard thing plus time. Right? People are like marathon runners. Those people have perseverance. Nobody's like that 10-meter dash. It takes a skill set. but it's not perseverance. I want you to just ponder for a second. As you listen, as this picture of healing, as this picture of this encounter with Jesus and this woman, what aspect of her healing do you most connect with? What aspect of the way Jesus heals her, in your own spirit, do you feel like, I would like healing in that area of my life? Turn to your neighbor. We're all becoming friends and community. What part of that healing? Physical, spiritual, emotional, community. Where do you feel like you need that healing? All right? Be vulnerable. And you might be like, I don't know, a girlfriend next to me. I'm not putting my business out there. Jesus literally just made this woman put her business out there. So turn to your neighbor and say, let's put our business out there. All right? How do you need to? Go. Talk for a minute. She's not in control of it. Some suffering comes to us because we've made stupid decisions. Oh my gosh, I dated a completely immature person and now he hurt me. How did it happen? I'm like, baby girl, I can't help you. That's called pain from your own bad decision. Try not to do that again, you know? Right, so I get it, like we just, you know, you lied to your professor. You cheated on a test, and now you feel bad about it, and you need to go tell them and get right with them and with the Lord. Some of y'all are like, what? Some of y'all be like, I didn't see that in this story at all. I just like to put that out there because that's college students who be struggling with that. You need to get right with the Lord. So, there's suffering that comes to you. I talked about my friend Sarah and her brother. Currently, I feel like I have been to the cancer rodeo more times than I can count. My mother had breast cancer. My stepfather died of cancer. Currently, one of my best friends last year was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer that had spread to her lymph glands, her lungs, and to her brain. And we have been walking with her, living with cancer. She's a mother of 3 kids, and this is what we're doing, and we're a year and a half into this thing, and it is suffering that has come, not by any of her own doing. There is that kind of suffering. It's not the main suffering I'm going to address, but that is like the suffering that has come to this woman. What I will say is, as Christians, sometimes we're very uncomfortable with that kind of suffering, and we're terribly annoying, and we say terribly annoying things to people. I have this thing when they find out that a friend, because I've been to the cancer rodeo so many times, things that you shouldn't say. When someone tells you something terrible, don't open with God has a plan. Don't say God doesn't give you more than you can bear. Don't be just super cheesy and annoying. Don't pretend it's not happening. Something terrible is happening and it's painful, and being present to each other's suffering is hard. And as Christians, sometimes I think we actually have capacity for that because the Holy Spirit can give us capacity for that, but instead we backtrack into cliches. That's all I'm going to say about it. Let's do better. I want to talk about the suffering sometimes that we can choose into, though. So I felt like I was supposed to tell you, Pam was so vulnerable and honest in sharing about her marriage, and I asked her if I could share this, but I felt like it was important for you to know that she didn't leave that marriage, that she got out of it. Because I think sometimes in Christian circles, especially with women, there can be this narrative that's like, oh, God's forming your character, stay in a terrible marriage. And I don't actually believe in that narrative. She doesn't believe in that narrative, and so that's also a part of her story that I think is important to know. For me, when I went to college, I was 17, I was like encountering Jesus, and I was like encountering this Jesus, and I was like, this Jesus is the best. And I realized like, oh, you know what, like, I want Jesus to be like everything in my life, and like, I've always had like a guy in my life. I'm a strong woman, but I've always had like some guy in my life, so I'm gonna take a period of time to be single. I'm just gonna be single for a minute. And I was like, because I don't want to get married and have like, it's because I was scared to be alone. So it was my freshman year. So I was like, I don't want to be single till I have this, I sense that God has discipled me in this way that like, because what would happen was if once I liked a boy, it'd be like, Jesus is in the center, and then I would be like, no, now, Jeff is. Residential college life is you don't need to be like formally dating someone to hang out with them all the time, right? So I was single but hanging out with Jeff all the time. And I was like, okay, so my friend like brought it up with me. She's like, hey, I think he's like moved to the center. And I was like, back off, I mean, you don't know my life. And then I thought about it and I was like, oh God, she's right. So I was like, so I'd be like, okay, we can't hang out. And it was rough because we were like the same circle of friends, but we were like so emotionally intertwined. The picture I had is, have you ever seen those plants with like the little wispy vines? I felt like that was my heart. Like I would unfurl it from one person and be like, wrap around Jesus for the love of God. Or Alvin. Okay? So at the end, after I disentangled from Jeff, I definitely bonded with Alvin. But I had caught it a little bit sooner, so I was like, okay, and I was like, so that was like not winning at being single, not really, right? And then I met the best one. He was this non-Christian guy, and he was perfect, and he played volleyball, and he was very handsome, and he was going to be an engineering major. I loved him the most. And I'm joking, but I honestly think this was like the first person I ever fell in love with. Like I just thought, I just did. He was amazing. And I realized, like, the minute I made this commitment to be single, how much I couldn't be single was evidenced, right? And so this was this discipling work that Jesus was doing in me, and so I kept staying single. And over time, I was learning how to let those little tendrils actually wrap around Jesus. And it's hard, because Jesus is invisible. And so if you have to choose between, like, a boy telling you you're pretty and Jesus telling you you're pretty, you're like, a death would go with this option. So I had to cultivate an inner life that could receive that from Jesus. All right, and not in just like he's my husband, okay, but like in a real way that my soul was being satisfied in Jesus, like the tendrils wrapped around him. And so then I graduated, and then there was blah, blah. It's too many details, but here I am 2 years out of college, and I finally feel released from this singleness commitment. So that was 6 years. 6 years for him, all right? And so at this point, I was like, girl, it's on the market, and here we can go. And everyone has like an internal clock for when they think they should be married, right? It's weird because I feel like at Christian colleges it's younger than other places, but it's like, you can't control that. Your clock of like when you think you should be married. So in my mind, it was like 27, 28. And when I hit 27 and I was still single, me and the Lord were starting to have words. Because a lot of my peers had gotten married, and they were not like, it was a lot of those marriages where people were like, oh, I think the Lord will redeem it. You know what I'm talking about? And I was like, are we doing that? I was like, well, I could have been in a Lord will redeem it marriage too if we were doing that. Like, I could have been married like a minute ago. So here I am, I'm like 28, I'm still single, and I'm 29, and I'm still single, and like a lot of people are in their redeemed marriages. And the other thing that's happening is like I'm a woman in ministry who's a leader who preaches, and I found out like a lot of Christian brothers are like, it's great to be a strong Christian woman. I don't want to date you, right? And so I was like, okay, this is frustrating to me. And then I became just bitter because I was like, I was obedient in college. I did the singleness thing. I let you form my character. And here I am. Why are you reward? Like, why everyone else getting married? All these people who like hoed about town in college. I keep it 100 with the Lord. People are like, you hoed about. You dated a non-Christian. A lot of glue. And here I am. I didn't do any of that stuff, and I'm still single. Following you sucks. And I mean, for real, I was pissed. So I'm talking to my counselor because everyone needs therapy. Everyone needs therapy. Get it? Y'all need therapy. Everyone does. So I'm talking to my counselor, godly woman, and I'm like, oh yeah, last night I was like in bed and I'm crying, and it's like, it's unfair, and I hate Jesus, and I'm pissed, and single, and I hate it. I'm like, it's not fair. I was like, it's not fair. It's not fair. Right, but you know what I'm talking about? I'm like laughing because all the way to crying. Do you know what I'm saying? Like you feel me, right? And she goes, oh, did you invite anybody? And I was like, what are you talking about right now? She's like, did you invite anybody? And I was like, I don't know. What are you? I mean, I'm literally explaining to her that I cried myself to sleep that night. And she's like, to your pity party. I was so full of self-pity, and she gave me a gift in calling that out. And here's the thing. I was single longer than I wanted to be, because part of how God forms our character and part of what perseverance is, it's not just what you get, it's when you get it. I got married, I just didn't get it when I wanted. And it's the when that really makes you clarify who is Lord. I am Lord means I get married when I want, how I want. Jesus' Lord is happened when he wanted, at different times, in my 30s. What was unearthed in me, in what was a form of suffering and perseverance and singleness, because I was really the last in my crew, among the last in my crew to get married, was that I thought following Jesus, I wouldn't have said this because it doesn't sound very fancy or theologically accurate, but I basically thought obedience should be rewarded with me getting what I wanted. And that relationship with Jesus was not enough of a reward. Because Jesus was like, you are rewarded. You learned to receive what you needed from me. And I was like, that sucks as a reward. And so he was like, let's stay here just a little bit longer so that you can find out that it doesn't suck as a reward. That's what God was forming in me. And that's a work we need to let God do in us. And it takes being real with God, with our story, with our janky theology that we don't realize is internalized until time exposes it. You know what I'm saying? Lord, I need to wrap up. All right. It was a form of perseverance that came through trying to choose obedience. There's another form of perseverance and engaging in suffering that I want to talk about. And that is I want to flip the story. I've been having us identify with the woman who was bleeding. But I want us to think about for 1 second from Jesus' perspective. Because what's really interesting to me is here comes this woman who is hemorrhaging blood, who is a woman in this society, and he is a healthy Jewish man who is respected in his culture. He doesn't know anything about what this is like. This has never happened to his body. This is not in the scope of his experience. And yet when she tells him her story, he believes her. You know, he believes her. This is important because part of being present to other people's suffering is when they share their story, we believe them, even when it is far outside of the scope of our own experience. And this is how we become people of justice. You may not think, but let's begin with, so I work in Black Campus Ministries. I'm a Korean and white woman. There is nothing in my life experience that has put me in the presence of violence at the hands of police. I don't get racially profiled. I don't get harassed by the police. But when my Black students tell me, particularly my male students, tell me that they experience constant harassment from the police, from when they were kids, when they're little kids coming out of the literal candy store and having to put both hands on a car and getting patted down at 8 and 9 and 10 years old, that is outside of the scope of my experience. But when they tell me their story, I believe them. When my student Laura, right, I grew up in a very white suburb. My student Laura, I was in LA, is a Mexican-American woman. I had never met anybody whose family was undocumented before. But she told me, and it was such a privilege and an honor that she would let me into something that she had to keep a secret because of what it could mean for her family. But she said, I didn't even know what it meant really that people were undocumented. She's like, my dad, like, he's undocumented. And every day when he went to work, we didn't know if he would come back. That's utterly outside of the scope of my experience. But when she told me her story, I believed her. Does that make sense? And that part, being women of grit, part of following Jesus' model is that when we are present to other people's suffering, when we are present to other people's stories, even if it's utterly different than anything that has happened to our bodies or to our narrative, our lives, as we believe them. Because if you look around these, a lot of racial misunderstanding, it's that similarly as a woman, when you try to say that something has happened to you, right, if you've been harassed, right, or someone has made you uncomfortable with sexual innuendo. When you tell that to a brother, do you want him to believe you? Or say, I think you were misreading it. You want to be believed. And that is the beginning of compassion and empathy. And that is the beginning of being able to be people who participate in justice. But I would say someone who has done racial justice work, and now somebody who has been in a community of a lot of Native American folks, when you hear the stories of how bad things are, how terrible things are, what happened to Native American folks. Like, I don't know if you're familiar with Native boarding schools. And for generations and generations, Native children were taken at the age of 4 or 5 from their families and put into these boarding schools where they're physically and sexually abused for decades. Staying present to that story, I've had to increase my own ability to stay present to other people's stories of suffering. That is part of being a woman of grit, part of being a person of justice. And so, I have to close. There's so many things that we can take away from this woman's courage to tell her whole story to Jesus, and then what Jesus models in, even though he doesn't understand anything about being a hemorrhaging woman. He believes her story, but he's present to it, and he treats her with compassion and dignity. It makes her family. And we want to be people like that. And so I want to send us into our small group time. Let's just take a minute. I want to just close by listening to the Holy Spirit together and see if there's a final word the Lord wants to give us as we're ending our conversation together. I feel like just to make sure we're all clear, because we all laugh along the way when the story about being single is to remember that obedience does lead to suffering sometimes. Obedience requires perseverance, and that doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. I also think that there is an invitation to just put down facade and be vulnerable about the real things that we're struggling with. And so Jesus, any kind of keeping up an image in front of each other, we just rebuke that in the name of Jesus. Because we can come before you and tell our whole story. And because of that, we can come before each other and tell our whole story. And respond to each other with compassion and kindness that flows from you.